Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the lost and forgotten collectible card games of old. Today, I'm starting a new collectible card game with the third collectible card game that was ever released. This one is Jyhad, or Vampire the Eternal Struggle, as it became known as. Now, as I said, it was originally released on August 16th of 1994 as the third collectible card game, and it was called Jyhad, with a Y. There is a distinction of that is a term in the game Vampire the Masquerade, so that's important to note right now. Now, it was developed by Richard Garfield, the creator of Magic the Gathering. He was the main developer in this. Now, it was renamed Vampire the Eternal Struggle in 1995, as they wanted to distance it from the Islamic word Jyhad, which has very different connotations than the Vampire the Masquerade one, because this is a game set in the world of darkness. That's an important thing to note about it. I'll talk a little bit more about the setting in a second. But the game was published by Wizards of the Coast up until 1996. The final expansion they had in 96, Wizards dropped the line. In 2000, Whitewolf picked it up and became the sole publisher of the system. So there was a 4-year period where the game system wasn't supported at all. And until 2010, September 10th actually, that was when the game was finally decided to be not published anymore. When Whitewolf announced they would not be publishing physical copies of the game anymore. So up until then, though, they had been supporting the game. So this game has had a rich history of approximately 12 years of actually being published. The game is made for 2 to 5 players, though 4 or 5 players is the ideal number, and you theoretically could have more players. It is set in an alternate universe to the traditional world of darkness that we know about. That is what it is considered, where the players take the role of a Methuselah, an ancient vampire, manipulating other vampires and various minions in order to destroy the power bases of their rival Methuselahs. So everybody's trying to destroy the power base of each other. Now, because player turns can take a few minutes, it is ideal to keep to that up to 5-player range. As soon as you get 6 or more players, games can take long periods of time. Up to the 4 or 5-player range, they can still take quite a while to have a full game of Vampire the Eternal Struggle. But beyond that, it becomes ridiculous, because the amount of time each player is going to have to spend. Conversely, 2 players has their own disadvantages. There's a type of gameplay that is actually based more around deals and manipulations and trades that doesn't really exist within 2 players. You need that at least 3rd player to begin to establish these relationships with each other as players and make sort of deals and things like that, maybe make and break alliances that you can't do with 2 players. Now, there are 2 components you're going to have to your deck. Your crypt and your library. Your crypt consists of all the vampires that you have under your effectively influence. Your library consists of all the other minions and special cards and actions that you can do. Oftentimes, you will be playing cards from your library in association with cards from your crypt, basically your vampires. You will have a pool called a blood pool that you can spend to actually purchase and use abilities across the board. It is a limited resource that you have to use wisely and spend as you feel necessary in order to defeat your opponents. You start with 30 blood points in your blood pool. Now, the object of the game is, of course, to oust all your opponents, remove them from the game, and you focus on your player to your left, while protecting yourself from assaults and effects from the player of your right. So you're basically got a sphere of influence of those players right adjacent to you. And as you oust players, as the group of players shrink, then the circle basically shrinks down as players are eliminated from the game. But it's at this point in time when we're all competing with each other, we all have a different pair of people we're working with. You gain an advantage for eliminating that player on your left. You get a bonus of 6 blood points to your blood pool, which if you get these kind of influx of power, this actually means that there could theoretically be a sweeping effect, that if I defeat my opponent, get this bonus, I can use that to defeat the next opponent, and so on and so forth, circling the board. Granted, that's rare that this can occur, but it is a possibility that because you're getting such a boost in ability. Now, the game is based around a number of concepts, more than beyond the cards. It has betrayals and deals, making allies, making trades, even bluffing opponents, tricking them. There's this level of gameplay that exists of the players talking and working with each other, mixing with the gameplay of the deck that you have built in order for you to master and manipulate the circumstance. No matter how great a wordsmith you are and good at making proper alliances and tricking people, if you don't have a great deck to back it up, then you're not going to be able to follow through. Now, games can take anywhere from 2 to 3 hours, depending on the number of players and how good your players are at doing it. Though, in tournament circumstances and some casual circumstances, a 2-hour limit will be basically put out. Then, depending on how much victory points you've earned, you get some bonuses, just everybody gets them if they're still in the game, and you figure out who has won by the most amount of victory that they have gained at that point in time. But this is just small details to the fact that you're limiting the amount of time you're effectively doing to speed things along, because the game can be so long. Now, there are a number of established gameplay types. Similar to Magic has things like aggro decks, there are various types of strategies that people do employ. I'm not going to dive into the strategies right now, but just know you could look up strategies online if you want to check out and learn how to do one of them and make your decks based around it. Now, the game has a distinct flavor. As I've talked about, you have this idealism of the words that you're using with each other, that you're talking with each other a lot more than you would do with any other card game, especially during these points in time. You're actually using and crafting deals with each other. But there's also this kind of idealism of the stronger and weaker decks. As I said, if I defeat my opponent, I get this strong influx of blood points. I'm making myself stronger. So there's this idealism of preying upon the weak decks and basically eliminating them, and then having the strong characters get stronger because of it. This also means that there will be stronger players that look out for the weaker player. I might try to help another weaker player on the board because it's going to behoove me to prevent my stronger opponent from defeating them and getting even more stronger. So I might do that. So this is definitely a game of deals and alliances, and trying to maintain these deals and alliances, and you might not. It's this kind of game of cat and mouse you're constantly going to be doing. And if there's ever any kind of question on a card, especially when it comes to Vampire the Masquerade terms that not everybody might be familiar with, then you'll go to a vote for it. You'll vote for various things for making major decisions on any kind of rules clarification based upon the cards. Now, when a base set was released, it was released in the form of a number of pre-constructed starter decks, usually 3 to 6, and booster packs. The starter decks contained 89 cards, a 77 card library, and a 12-card crypt. The booster packs traditionally contained 11 cards, especially in the newer sets, though some of the older ones, the boosters could have varied. These contain a combination of common cards, vampires, and a rare card. It's important to note that the starter deck also did have a rules book with it. Now, the base sets were basically made to have people build decks out of. It's made to be the main source of deck building material that a player could have. Many of them actually had a large number of reprints from earlier base sets and expansions, so there was this idealism of reprinting within the base sets. Now, expansions always had booster packs and sometimes had pre-constructed starter sets associated with them. The point of an expansion was it usually was somehow theme-based. This means that they were very specific, and building a deck straight out of expansion was not easy, and oftentimes you really couldn't do it. Now, this also meant that when it came to reprinting into a base expansion, most of the time, a lot of the cards were not reprinted. They were unique to that. Though if they did have a starter deck associated with that expansion, oftentimes cards that were in the starter deck were the ones that were actually looked at as part of the reprints. Lastly, there were mini expansions. Mini expansions only had booster packs. They never had anything else, and they were effectively 60 card sets that you could get to. Now, after the first expansion, Dark Sovereigns, the set basically symbol was put in the upper right corner of the card, and that was a good way of identifying what set those cards came from. Now, there were 6 base sets that were released over the history of Vampire the Eternal Struggle. Of course, the first 2 were Jyhad, followed quickly by Vampire the Eternal Struggle the next year, but after that, we did have Spot War and Camarilla edition, sort of filling out the middle of these, being both released early on in the course of the Whitewolf run of printing. Then they had 3rd edition, which was printed in the middle of this area, which was effectively their big uphaul of all the rules. The last one being released then in 2008, Keepers of Tradition. So that was the last base expansion released. Now, it had 12 expansions that released over the course of the year in conjunction with these base sets, with the final one, Heirs to Blood, being released on February 3rd of 2010. So that was the last actually published full expansion that came out. There were 2 special sets that were released, including a foil 10th edition set, and another special edition set that was with 100 cards, released some years after it. There were 4 mini expansions printed over the course of the later ends of Vampire the Eternal Struggle. But this wasn't the last product. I said the printing run ended in 2010. Since then, 4 PDF versions of mini expansions have been released that you can get, and effectively tournaments give special rules for how you can print out copies of these cards and still use them in your decks. So this is a very interesting little tidbit here, that there's printed cards that you can print on your own that are new that you could use in your decks. So there has been an interesting support for the game since then, just not in printed format. But there is an exception to that now. Vampire the Eternal Struggle Anthology has been announced to be coming out soon. This is a special set that is only being released to participating members of the 19th annual Vampire the Eternal Struggle World Championship that's going to be going on in Berlin this year. So later on this year, if you're participating in the World Championships of Vampire the Eternal Struggle, you can get a special 100-card anthology set of cards. Basically mostly reprints with a few new ones. And this will be the first printing that Whitewolf has put out since then. 6 years of silence. And now, granted, this isn't a general release, so this isn't a return to the game yet. But this is a release of new cards in a way. Special ones. Now, though Wizards really only published the 2 base sets and 3 expansions, there was a big period of time, as I talked about. This is because it took 4 years for Whitewolf to reacquire the full license of the game back to them. Well, they had sort of licensed out the concept of making this game to Wizards of the Coast. They wanted the full license back to themselves, and it took them 4 years to negotiate and reacquire that to be able to republish it. Now, there has been some online versions of the game, but none of them have really had major support over the years. They have existed, and some of them you can still access now, but they don't have the same support as they did when they first came out. They don't really see a lot of the expansions and stuff to spread them out. In the same retrospect, though, opposite actually, tournaments and player support still exist greatly. Whitewolf does support some of the main tournament support that exists out there. They do get behind it, as shown by the anthology set that's being released, that they do support people that continue to have tournaments based upon their products and support the players that exist out there. Even if making a product really isn't in their nature, that making something that actually would be sold out to the public just isn't something that's going to occur. So that's it for today. I introduced you to the history of Vampire the Eternal Struggle, a card game based upon the world of darkness, of Vampire the Masquerade, which I've talked about Vampire the Masquerade on this channel. You might know some things about it because of what I've talked about it. This was the 3rd collectible card game that ever came out, and it was designed and created by the man who made Magic the Gathering. Richard Garfield designed this game. He was the head designer. And it's such a different game than Magic because he wanted to test out the extremes he could go to, how he could evolve this medium of collectible card games, different than anything people imagined. People were thinking in the terms of what Magic the Gathering had. He wanted to blow them out of the water with something completely different, and he did. He helped evolve the medium so that there are so many different types of collectible card games, because he wanted to. He wanted to move beyond what he created and allow more to be out there, not the same thing. And this game reflects it. In the next episode, I'm going to move into talking about the rules of it, kind of diving into a little bit more about the game itself. So if you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave it in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It's to support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. I do recommend checking out the Whitewolf RPG and gameplay media Facebook group that I'm a member of, that I put a lot of my other vampire and werewolf videos on. I will be putting my videos up on there too. They put out a lot of great material related to the World of Darkness. I'd recommend checking them out. Regardless though, until the next time, I bid you farewell.